You know your classic rock, right? But let's put that to the test. If you recognize even half of these bands, then you're not just a fan, you're an expert. We're talking about groups including legends like Robert Plant, Paul Rodgers, Jeff Beck, Gary Moore, David Bowie, and more. Welcome to VRP Rocks. I'm Paul Stevenson, and around here we don't just talk about classic rock legends, we interview them. There's more than 450 videos on this very channel. But today we're diving deep into the bands that even hardcore fans sometimes forget, the side projects, the supergroups, and the spin-offs featuring iconic musicians. And stick around because I'll be telling you about the supergroup made up of some of the greatest rock stars of all time. They got a major label release, and the album even charted on Billboard. But not all was as it seemed. Three were formed in 1987 by Keith Emerson and Carl Palmer, yes, of ELP fame, along with American multi-instrumentalist Robert Berry. They put out just one album. It was called To the Power of Three in 1988. The music veered away from ELP's sweeping, classically inspired prog and leaned into the melodic, arena-ready rock sound of the late 80s. Their single, Talking About, was a minor hit, and the musicianship is rock solid, but critics weren't kind. Prog purists wanted epics, not synth-pop hooks. Fun fact though, Emerson and Berry had worked on demos for a second album before Emerson sadly passed away. Robert completed those songs and released them in 2018 as 3.2. The rules have changed. So this story didn't end where we thought it did. Next up we have the Honey Drippers. Sounds like a doo-wop group, but that's kind of the point. This was Robert Plant's way of paying tribute to the 1950s. So if we fast forward through the excess of the late 60s and the 70s and the behemoth that was the Led Zeppelin machine, by the early 80s Robert Plant wanted to reconnect with the music that he grew up on, the big band swing and early R&B of his youth. He called up Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck, and with Nile Rodgers helping shape the sound, they recorded Volume 1 in 1984. Sea of Love, that was a massive hit, number 3 in the US and bigger than anything Plant had done in his solo years up to that point. But here's the twist, this was never meant to be a serious long-term band, it was just Plant blowing off steam and doing stuff between albums. There's still no Volume 2, by the way, and fans have been asking about it for nearly 40 years. In interviews, Plant says he never intended to follow it up. It's just a fun one-off that's dripping with style and nostalgia. So, did you buy the Honey Drippers record? Do you even remember it? Let me know in the comments below. Next up, after one of the biggest stadium tours of the 80s, one legendary rock drummer reappeared months later, not behind a kit, but out front with a guitar, leading a brand new band. The group was The Cross, the frontman, Queen's Roger Taylor. But in this band he took on lead vocals and rhythm guitar duty. Formed in 1987 during Queen's post-Magic tour downtime, The Cross was Taylor's experiment in being the frontman. Their debut album, Shove It, mixed dance rock and synth grooves. Think hot space vibes turned up a notch. It even featured Freddie Mercury on vocals for Heaven for Everyone and Brian May on guitar for another track as well. The album landed in the UK charts and had modest radio success in Germany, where the band did most of their touring and promo. The second album, Mad, Bad and Dangerous to Know, showed The Cross evolving into a real unit, this time with more writing from a full band point of view, and it had a sharper hard rock edge as well. Tracks like Power to Love and Liar became minor hits, especially in Germany. They played festivals, appeared on European TV shows and carved out quite a loyal following. By the third album, Blue Rock, Roger had stepped back creatively. Most of the writing was handled by keyboardist Spike Edney, also part of Queen's touring crew. But the band was tight, energized and making solid music. EMI didn't release this album in the UK, but it saw a proper release in Germany, where fans still treasure it. The Cross broke up quietly in 1993, just before the Queen and Paul Rodgers era kicked off. But if you want to look at Roger Taylor pushing boundaries, not just as a drummer but as a frontman, then check out this forgotten chapter, The Cross. At number 4, we have a band that looked engineered to blow the roof off rock history. A British guitar wizard and 2 American heavy hitters from one of the loudest bands of the late 60s. But if you blinked in 1973, then you probably missed them. It's a power trio that was so intense it burned out before it really started. Beck, Bogert and Appice. After the Jeff Beck group collapsed, he finally joined forces with Tim Bogert and Carmine Appice, the thunderous rhythm section from Vanilla Fudge and Cactus. Their only studio album dropped in March 1973, hit number 12 in the US. They toured America, Europe and Japan, and then imploded. A second album was started but never finished. One live record survived, but the band didn't. And speaking of bands, I'm going to tell you all about one that claimed to feature Bob Dylan, Mick Jagger, Paul McCartney, John Lennon and others. But it didn't. And here's the kicker, it actually released an album. It got a major label deal and charted on Billboard too. It's one of the greatest music spoofs of all time, and I'll tell you more about that soon. Next up, we've got a project with one of the greatest voices in rock, backed by an all-star lineup, and yet, even the singer wasn't quite sold on it. Paul Rodgers was a certified rock god, Free, Bad Company, you name it. When 1991 rolled around, he teamed up with... No, you probably think I'm going to say Jimmy Page and The Firm, but what I'm talking about is another group. This time Paul joined forces with The Faces and Who drummer Kenny Jones to form The Law. Now on paper this had everything. Their one album was even loaded with guests like David Gilmour, Chris Rea and Bryan Adams. The sound, smooth, bluesy rock with a slick early 90s gloss. The single Laying Down the Law cracked the US mainstream rock chart. And despite all that star power, The Law only ever played one live gig, opening for ZZ Top and Bryan Adams at the Milton Keynes Bowl. Rodgers called it completely balmy. He and Kenny were itching to tour, but nothing came. Rodgers also later said he felt disconnected. Too many outside writers, not enough soul. It felt like a label project, not a real band, but it's still a solid slice of rock history, if you ask me. Next on our list is another power trio from the early 70s and another band that combined two of the loudest, bluesiest bands of the late 60s. We got a band that came together and sounded like a bar fight set to music, and I mean that in the best possible way. Jack Bruce from Cream and Leslie West and Corky Lang from Mountain. Put them together, you get West, Bruce and Lang. Clever name. A short-lived supergroup that played like a runaway train, equal parts brilliance, equal parts chaos. Their debut, Why Don't You, dropped in 1972, all fuzzed-out bass, roaring guitars, and Bruce's unmistakable vocals. The follow-up, Whatever Turns You On, came out a year later and leaned even harder into the grit. Both albums are soaked in the early 70s analog filth that classic rock fans live for. Live, they were a spectacle, unpredictable, loud, and sometimes barely holding it together. But that was kind of the appeal. You didn't go to a West, Bruce and Lang show for precision, you went for the danger. But like a lot of supergroups from the era, the flame burned hot and fast. Egos clashed, exhaustion set in, and well, drugs did the rest. They split in 1974, just 2 years after forming. But still, for those couple of years, they delivered some of the heaviest, most authentic blues rock of the era. They didn't last, but they left a crater. Do you remember The Doctor? Tell me in the comments below if West, Bruce and Lang were heavy on your playlist in the 70s. At number 7, we have two prog rock icons who walk into a studio and made pop rock. That's GTR, formed by Steve Howe of Yes and Steve Hackett from Genesis. Their one and only album, GTR from 1986, was a commercial success. It went gold in the US. It was produced by former Buggles Asia and Yes man Jeff Downes, and the album was meant to bridge that prog complexity with radio hooks. The single, When the Heart Rules the Mind, hit number 14 on Billboard, which is Hackett's only top 20 appearance in the US. But tensions rose fast, and behind the scenes the wheels were falling off. Hackett later said that his creative chemistry with Howe never quite clicked. At one point he even reached out to Brian May about joining, demoing 3 tracks together, but nothing came of it. Meanwhile, the band was buried in debt. Hackett was the one who finally pulled the plug, shutting it all down with what he called an extraordinary general meeting before a second album could even be made. Still, the record's become a cult classic, and you can hear them trying to bend prog chops into something that MTV might play. And it almost worked. Now let's see if you remember number 8. Before he went full-on blues, before Thin Lizzy, Gary Moore was shredding in one of the most technically fierce, criminally overlooked bands of the 70s. Coliseum II rose from the ashes of drummer John Heisman's previous group, Tempest. He started putting together the new lineup in late 1974, and after months of auditions, the final form included Gary Moore on guitar, future Rainbow, Deep Purple and Aussie man Don Airey on keys, we had future Whitesnake and Black Sabbath man Neil Murray on bass, and Mike Starrs on vocals. Their debut, Strange New Flesh from 1976, combined jazz fusion with hard rock, and Moore's playing is off the charts. But sales were underwhelming, and by mid-year both Murray and Starrs were out. John Mole came in on bass, and from that point on it was mostly instrumental, tighter, heavier, and way more intense. They produced 2 further albums, Electric Savage and War Dance, and while they never broke commercially, they did land on a surprise hit, Variations, a classical meets rock project with Andrew Lloyd Webber. That album actually hit number 2 in the UK chart in 1978, but by the end of that year, it was over. Moore left to rejoin Thin Lizzy, Don Airey jumped ship to Rainbow, and just like that, Coliseum II vanished. Underrated, underplayed, but unforgettable, especially if your album collection is deep enough to include them. Now here's a band that sounds made up, the sharp-tongued singer behind Werewolves of London, backed by the rhythm section that brought us Shiny Happy People in a blues rock cover band. Welcome to Hindu Love Gods, the best accidental supergroup you've probably never heard of. The lineup, well, it is Warren Zevon on vocals and guitar, backed by R.E.M's Bill Berry, Mike Mills and Peter Buck, and it somehow started in dive bars in Athens, Georgia, and they were playing Easy Beats covers and unrecorded Zevon tracks for fun. By 1987, though, while cutting Zevon's Sentimental Hygiene album, the 4 of them stuck around in the studio late one night and banged out 10 raw blues covers. Just for kicks. Or so they thought. 3 years later, those tapes were released as a full album under the name of Hindu Love Gods. The album includes gritty takes on tunes like Walkin' Blues and Junko Partner, but the breakout was their garage rock version of Prince's Raspberry Beret, which hit number 23 on the modern rock chart. It's wild, loose, and entirely unlike anything else the members ever had released. There was no tour, no promo, no reunion, just one album, one strange chapter, and a lingering sense that something real and raw had happened, completely by accident. Oh, and here's that spoof I teased you about earlier. Back in 1969, Rolling Stone magazine ran a fake review of a non-existent supergroup album. They called it The Masked Marauders. The review claimed it featured Bob Dylan, Mick Jagger, John Lennon, George Harrison and Paul McCartney jamming in secret somewhere near Hudson Bay. There was talk of an 18-minute version of Season of the Witch, and Dylan supposedly doing a deep-voiced cover of Duke of Earl. It was clearly satire, but readers didn't get the joke and demand exploded. Fans started asking where could they buy the album. So what did Rolling Stone do? They doubled down. They recruited a real band, a group of Bay Area musicians, and recorded an album for real. Only then did Warner Brothers step in to release it, creating a new label called Deity Records just to make the whole thing feel legit. The result? Well, The Masked Marauders sold over 100,000 copies, cracked the Billboard 200, and featured tracks that sounded just real enough to keep the myth alive. They couldn't include the names or the pictures of the rock stars involved because of contractual obligations, of course. And to this day, people still argue over who was really on the record. But the truth, well, it was all a hoax, one of the greatest in rock history, and one that accidentally became a hit. And on to our last group then. What do you do when you're one of the most famous musicians on the planet and you kind of hate what you've become? Well, if you're David Bowie in 1988, you grow a beard, form a band, and make the loudest, weirdest music of your life. Tin Machine wasn't a side project, it was a statement. Bowie teamed up with the avant-garde guitarist Reeves Gabrels and the rhythm section of Iggy Pop's The Idiot Tour, brothers Hunt and Tony Sales. They were loud, abrasive, and absolutely not playing Let's Dance. Their first album in 1989 was a hard-edged break from Bowie's polished 80s output. Critics didn't really know what to make of it, but it did hit number 3 in the UK. The second album came out in 1991, followed by a chaotic live record. Bowie called it a band with 4 bosses, and they meant it. No one was on salary, everyone split the bills, the songs, and the spotlight. The music was raw, punk-leaning and often recorded in one take. Bowie said Tin Machine gave him a creative lifeline, a way out of the commercial box that he'd built around himself. They played small venues, they dodged the hits, and left behind 2 records that critics would come to appreciate, especially after the rise of grunge. They weren't built to last though, and by 92 it was over. But Bowie always said that Tin Machine revived him, recharged him, and without it we may never have gotten Outside Heathen or even Black Star. So, how many of these bands did you actually know? Drop your score in the comments below. If you know more than 5, then I'd say you're a certified rockologist. Hit like if you learned something new, and subscribe for more deep dives and interviews with the legends themselves, right here with me on VRP Rocks.